Welcome to day one of the post-Ralph Krueger era here on Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK. I am Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with Matthew Fairburn, also of The Athletic, and Jonah Bronstein of Bronstein Consolidated. The Sabres finally fired Ralph Krueger. And, I should say, we're going to be joined later on in this podcast, in fact, fairly soon, by New York Post sports columnist and St. Bonaventure grad Mike Vaccaro to talk about journalism and his Bonnies, who are playing Louisiana State in the first round of the NCAA basketball tournament on Saturday. But guys, Ralph Krueger's gone. I think that was something that was to be expected. My reportage had told me that he was done for, but was probably going to be given the rest of the season. But it just got to be too much for the Pagulas to take after 12 straight losses. I guess just your thoughts on the decision and the timing of it.
Yeah, we talked the other day about what, the pros and cons of each approach, if they'd be able to, kind of bury their heads and push forward until May. But I do think you're right. It became a bit too much. That became the story of this team. Every day, every time he opened his mouth, every time he did a press conference, there was something. And we spoke the other day about, how those press conferences were seemingly becoming the story, the combative nature and the repetitive combative nature of those press conferences, which was not Ralph Krueger's fault, but it became a point of, do you want this being the representation of the Buffalo Sabres on a near daily basis?
Well, how about this, Matthew? Jonah Bronstein and I get together at Elmo's last night for a few beers, and the game's on, of course. And afterwards, Adam behind the bar goes to put on music, and there was some pushback of wanting to listen to the post-game news conferences.
From you. There wasn't pushback from anybody else.
Once I mentioned it, there were others at the bar that were, at least one. The guy to my left was also very much into it. Anyway.
They wanted a pound of flesh daily, and there were some reporters happy to play that game, and it was not just quietly going about losing. It was not just, if they had sprinkled in some wins in this, and there was some, and it wasn't so. And I'm not saying that he got fired because of the media or because of the fans or whatever, but I just think it became too much.
If there'd been anything to disrupt the malaise, like you say, a win in which Sam Reinhart gets a hat trick or whatever, a shutout, so somebody can, talk about Carter Hutton for a couple of days, but there was no break.
Dylan Cousins was the last break. Dylan Cousins gets in that fight. He becomes kind of a feel-good moment. I don't know that anybody expected that to spark this team. I've seen Bulldog's been tweeting out the stats since the fight to illustrate. Clearly, it did not fire up the boys, but I think what it did was it said, look, there's a guy who cares. There's like one encouraging piece of this organizational puzzle. Certainly didn't have an impact on the rest of the team because the team's just not very good. There's, issues beyond that, but that was the last time that it felt like Ralph Krueger wasn't just the constant story, the constant, everything he said, every time he opened his mouth, every time another reporter told him he sucked and that his team didn't care about him and, all this stuff. Like, it just became, that was what people were talking about. It wasn't even how bad the Sabres sucked. It was, this coach. And so getting rid of, there were some things they had to get squared away. I don't think the Pagulas entered this season planning on this being a thing they had to deal with necessarily. Even if they were bad, if they were as bad as they've been the last few years, it could be like, well, we could get by to the end of the season and fire them. they had to go through a few different things. Probably first of which saying, hey, does Kevin Adams have permission to do this? Like, do we want to give Kevin Adams the authority to fire this coach, or even just present that publicly that he has the ability to do this? You got to square that away first. And then you had to square away logistically everything that had to happen. Who can be the interim coach, with quarantine rules and everything happening in Rochester? Do you want to hire immediately and secretly quarantine a coach or something? There was more complicated than a normal year, and probably not something they were even thinking about doing. But it did seem to bring down the temperature in the room when Kevin Adams spoke today, which I guess is a minor win considering what they've had the last couple of months.
It's also the matter of, is this going to change anything on the ice and in the locker room for this team, especially when you're elevating from within? You would think that it's probably going to keep a lot of the same systems and culture of the team, at least in the short term. Or will it be, I remember when Dick Duran got fired and Perry Fuel was the interim head coach, and he made a lot of changes. He changed the quarterback, and he and maybe that was just for show to show what changes he could make, but it seemed like he sensed that things needed to change, even if they weren't big changes, that you couldn't go forward with the same group and the same dynamic. And so I'll be curious to see whether the Sabres win, lose, or play well in these next couple games. Are there changes in the way they play or the way the lineup is constructed, or is it more of the same? Because if it is, then we realize Ralph Krueger wasn't really the problem.
Maybe you see Jeff Skinner on a line with Jack Eichel when Jack Eichel comes back from his injury, which Kevin Adams said on the news conference that he's coming back. But there was a quarantine situation. He went out of state for a second opinion, and so it seems as though Jack Eichel will be playing again at some point. So there's really not a lot you can do in hockey like in football. You mentioned all the different, change your starting quarterback. I mean, especially the Sabres, there's no goaltending controversy. I mean, it's not like you can do that. About the only thing you can do is just juggle your lines a little bit.
And they can't call up players from Rochester right now to shake things up or make a statement to some of the veteran players.
It seems like Skinner is the one that they can. That's sort of the shining example of like where Ralph Krueger butted heads with a player. The only open one, the big story the last few weeks became, they've quit on Ralph Krueger, which I think is probably the laziest take you can have. It requires no thought. Nobody's going to argue with it because they're getting their ass kicked every night.
And you can't prove it.
You can't prove it. You can't disprove it. You can just say it and yell it loudly and puff your chest and body people, and it's great. It's awesome. But I think it's a lousy take, and one that there's no evidence on the ice that they've quit. Are they burnt out? Have they lost confidence? Do you have a tracker on them? Have you heard them say something to the coach? Their one example is Jeff Skinner of a situation where it clearly didn't go well. Thought Sam Reinhart actually, who's not a great quote, and I don't think a lot of people who cover the team rely on him for insight. But the other night when Mike Harrington said this team looks like it's quit, and Sam Reinhart probably responded best by saying, I don't know what you want me to say. Like, I like this coach. I like the guys around me. Okposo was talking about, how tough it is to get up for these games when it's going that way. There's a psychological element, but like, were they outwardly defiant against the coach? I don't think so. Like you said, it's really hard to prove. But the Jeff Skinner part is one where you can say, look, this is or two guys, I think, Skinner and Dahlin, where you could say, these guys are being put in roles that aren't working because of this coach. If I'm an interim coach, I'm letting Rasmus Dahlin loose, say, basically do whatever the hell you want. It can't get any worse. So if there's an offensive game that you feel like you haven't been able to play under the old coach, go and get you some. Like, we need some goals. And the other thing is bump Jeff Skinner up, give him some confidence, give him some reason to want to play here, because I think those are the two guys that you look at and say, there is some evidence that there was a bit of an issue with the coach. Now, I'm not saying Dahlin had an issue, but you could say that his play went backwards because of this coach. and probably, find some pretty concrete examples of it. So yeah, maybe there's a way to provide a bit of a jolt that way. But, talk to Chris Baker about this team quite a bit, because he's, I feel like, pretty knowledgeable on the hockey scene, and he's seen a lot. And all along, his thing has just been that the team is not good. That there's not a lot of talent on the team. And is Krueger part of the problem? Sure, he certainly was. And it became an almost impossible thing to keep him around to a certain point. But there are other questions that need to be asked, including whether this general manager is going to be the one to turn things around, or, like Jonah said, there's not much you can do right now, but, what is the plan going forward, and what sort of power does he have? Who's he listening to? Who does he get input from? Who do you surround him with? And if the big one, Jack Eichel potentially getting traded, which won't happen at the deadline most likely, but that chatter will resume in the offseason. Do you let this guy make that trade? Like, that is a massive trade to make. Like, if they do it, could you justify it? Could you get a return? Like, maybe.
Kevin Adams did say on his news conference that he will be hiring an assistant GM, which it's kind of amazing to think that that's a conclusion that's being come to, in the middle of March, let's hire an assistant GM, when there were 2 last year and a bunch of scouts. And now the team is, has half as many scouts and no assistant general managers. One of the captains that I spoke to for that piece that I wrote for The Athletic a couple of weeks ago regarding what's been going on with the Sabres and their thoughts, one of those anonymous captains specifically mentioned, let these guys turn them loose. Let them. Scoring goals is fun. You might lose the game still because maybe you give up too much on defense, but just these guys are clearly not having fun out there.
They're not.
Let them go score some goals.
Tim. They had like 2 shots in the first period the other night. I mean, so yeah, well, sure.
Get out of your system. Whatever that system is, get out of it. Let them just go.
Lose a game.
Maybe you give
8-5.
up some. Yeah, maybe you give up some 3-on-2s.
Yeah.
But whatever. Let's just get out there and skate and shoot. Maybe the next coach will allow them to do that.
Do either of you think, and Kevin Adams was asked about this and said it wasn't the case, but do either of you think that the fact that fans are coming back for the first time this week and will be in the building for the rest of the games precipitated this move at all? Was this sort of a, move to get ahead of that, to keep from an ugly situation where the fans would be booing them constantly in these games?
I hope that didn't factor into it, because that is a rather soft reason to want to fire somebody. If you believe in your guy, then you should stick with them. The fans booing, however many there are that are going to show up. Maybe the feedback though that they got in reaching out to their season ticket holders, obviously it went from season ticket holders. They didn't clear enough tickets for that. So then they put the tickets on sale to the general public. Clearly there wasn't enough interest there, because then all of a sudden first responders, we're going to be giving our tickets away to the first responders. But maybe in their market research, or just fielding the phone calls, or is there whatever, is that maybe they caught wind that there were going to be signs, or like there were the people who were coming for that reason. But I would hope that
maybe it was a wake-up call to how little interest there was in attending these games, and there weren't too many ways the ownership could respond to that, but this was one way that they could do something that a lot of fans were asking for, and maybe get a little bit of goodwill, at least temporarily, from making this seemingly popular move right before not the home opener, but the home fan opener.
Right. It's going to be difficult to boo the coach you really don't know anything about, which is the case with the replacement, Granato. Interesting. I had tweeted it out. The betting odds are the favorite to be the next Sabres full-time head coach is John Tortorella. And I would love to see that.
Great
that
for us.
It's
great for the reporters covering the team.
It would be great to see how the reporters on this team, if they have the temerity to treat John Tortorella with the same attitude as they've treated Kevin Adams and Ralph Krueger, because there would be, well, I think some of these reporters would get bodied.
I think there could be some bodying happening. Yeah, just but that isn't that what this team kind of needs? Like, oh, I think your team quit. I think like
John Worrell made a great point. Wouldn't it be
like
wouldn't the team would love, I mean, the players would love to see Krueger just at least stand up and defend himself rather than just keep taking it.
Right. Like get bent, you don't have to like tell him to F off or anything, because that's going to cause more trouble than it's worth probably. But, tell a guy to grow up, like ask me a question. Like we've seen it happen before. Tortorella is probably the best example, but I don't know. It might've gotten something out of the team, because kind of like Sam Reinhart, who was like, what the hell do you want me to say? Like, and we see it from, I think Sean McDermott can be that way at times. He's not John Tortorella, but he'll certainly stop you in your tracks and, have kind of an attitude at times. And I'm sure I don't know, there's something to it. I think John Worrell was onto something there. What other cards do you have to play if you're Ralph Krueger? Master motivator, psychological genius. Ran out of cards. He was saying the same thing over and over. I mean, he had an option there, and
I think he had like a 37 card deck.
I respect
it
how
didn't
he
seem
handled
like
himself.
he had a lot of cards in his repertoire to begin with. To me,
I respect him for being professional about everything, but I also wouldn't have minded to see him lose his cool a little bit and show that he cared, because you can only be so calm for so long.
And if not with the reporters, throw sticks on the ice, whatever.
Right. Not that it would have mattered. Again, I always come back to what Chris keeps saying is like, they're just not good. So it's like, what choice did Ralph Krueger have? What system could he play? What lineup change could he make? What stick could he throw? What curse word could he, say to change anything? Who knows? But wouldn't have hurt to try, because now look at him.
If you can find him, if he's I don't know that he will be able to be looked at based on what happens to former Sabres coaches and GMs. He will evaporate into nothing, and we will never hear or see from him again. Jonah, your thoughts?
I was just thinking about how it's probably unlikely that he'll evaporate into nothing, and also that, he's probably going to go overseas and coach club rugby or cricket or something like that. This guy is very resourceful in these sports jobs and the things that he can do. He can talk his way into a lot of jobs. I actually don't think Ralph Krueger is the worst hockey coach I've ever seen. I think it was a bad mix with this team in this season and a lot of the things that snowballed this year, but he seemed to coach them up a little bit last year, at least in the first part of the season. And I don't know if he'll be an NHL coach again. I don't even know if he'll be a major league hockey coach in any way again. But I think he
went 10 years
good
between
communication
jobs
and leadership. And I actually don't think this is the end of Ralph Krueger being a coach, teacher type person in some way, some form. I do think there's maybe this was supposed to be his redemption story a little bit, at least in terms of NHL hockey coaching. So maybe that comes in some other fashion. But I guess I'm just saying, I think Phil Housley was a worse coach than Ralph Krueger. And I think there's ways that you can look at this and maybe think that Ralph Krueger was scapegoated for problems that weren't his doing. But when you lose that many games and you have no cards you can play and no buttons you can push and nothing's getting any better, especially in the NHL where coaches get fired quicker than in any other sport, the time did come where this had to happen.
That is an interesting thought, Jonah, because a lot of people don't hold that belief. I think just a lot of people look at, and I disagree with you. I just think that I think that he was a terrible coach. Mostly because he
Well,
was.
and maybe he was not a good coach in the system that he chose to play and not modifying it and the X's and O's and the positions he put players in. But if you listen to what he said, a lot of what he said made sense. You started to roll your eyes and thought, we heard it all before. But I thought when he explained the problems that they had and the way they were doing things, it sounded like he had a pretty good read on why this team wasn't any good and couldn't get them to play any better, but didn't seem lost in terms of what they should be doing and what they're not doing. But maybe I just like him because he fills our notebook. I think there was part of that too. And I'm not there as often as everybody else and don't have to write about the Sabres every time. If I'm there, I often write about the team that wins the game, which usually isn't the Sabres. So maybe it was harder to gauge, how much bullshit was coming out of his mouth as opposed to stuff that seemed to me to make sense more often than not.
Jonah Bronstein, Ralph Krueger apologist.
I don't know if it's that, but I think the rhetoric that he was the problem and they had to make the move got a little too hot, is I guess my point.
Should be noted that Jonah Bronstein also believes that OJ didn't do it.
I can hold both opinions in my head at the same time.
You're not afraid to back up a unpopular opinion, an uncommon opinion. I guess that's unpopular.
I also think I was rooting for Ralph Krueger to be the coach on opening day next year so that you had to ride around the city in a tricycle, in a diaper, riding a tricycle.
Yep.
Because
I would have done it too.
A big story.
I would have done it. I don't think it would have been a story. Some people might have come out to see it. Like,
it's a story I would have told over and over again after it happened.
Oh, I see. I thought you meant like Channel 4 would be out there to cover
I think
it.
Channel 4 would be out there covering it too.
They might have
4
actually.
and 7.
I was already. I mean, I was so obviously I wouldn't have made that statement if I wasn't convinced that he was going to get fired. But had that happened, I'm guessing I would have probably tried to turn it into some sort of fundraiser for Make-A-Wish or whatever. But I would have done it. I know there are other people that have made bold
That's
statements and then gotten away. What's that?
But that's your wish. They give you the opportunity to make.
Yeah, I
want to ride a tricycle in a diaper.
Right. I would allow any other sick, if there were some sick children out there that also wanted to ride around the
Great.
Lafayette Square in a tricycle, they could have joined me. We could have made like a little convoy.
Good
All
times.
right. Let's bring in Mike Vaccaro from the New York Post. But after these words. Tim Graham and Friends is brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and business consultants. CTBK is a leading accounting firm with a growing team of accountants and business consultants with roots in Amherst, New York. CTBK pairs every project with a focus on a human connection between its team and the client. For assurance, accounting, taxes, litigation support, and advice on mergers and acquisitions, CTBK is available and ready to solve any issue your business faces. For a consultation or to request a quote, call 716-630-2400. Again, that's 716-630-2400. CTBK, over a quarter century of proven accounting and business excellence for Western New York and beyond. On this episode of Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, we are joined by Mike Vaccaro, New York Post columnist, and that's enough of a credential right there. But he is making his appearance so we can talk about his beloved alma mater. And there's something about that. Maybe we need to get into alma maters, but it's something about Bonaventure graduates that really wave that banner. Anyway, Mike Vaccaro, thank you for doing this.
Hey, it's good to be here, Tim. Thanks for having me.
And big doings for St. Bonaventure basketball team. Mark Schmidt, of course, having a marvelous season, winning the regular season title, then winning the tournament. And will play Louisiana State on Saturday, but you were just telling us right before we hit the record button, this is causing some problems in the Vaccaro household.
My wife is an LSU graduate, so I mean, I don't know what I'm not good at math, so I'm not sure what the probability of the two of us meeting in the first round of an NCAA tournament was. I mean, 316 Division I teams or however many, and there we are. Especially because I don't think either fan base is all that terribly happy to see each other because they both think they were probably underseeded. But it's going to make for a lot of fun in my house between now and Saturday, that's for sure.
How did you meet your wife?
Well, I'm from Long Island and she's from Dallas, and by way of Monroe, Louisiana. So naturally we met in Arkansas. Actually, we worked in a newspaper together in Arkansas. I was the sports editor of a small daily paper that covered the Razorbacks, and she was her first job out of LSU was covering cops and courts for the Northwest Arkansas Times. And we just it's funny, we hit it off. My opening line, she loves to always tell people this, is, "Do you drink beer?" Which for Bonaventure people is really the only opening line. So it's been a wonderful love story ever since, at least until now. I'm not sure it can survive the brown and white against the purple and gold.
I mean, I guess that really does. I mean, that gets to the core of how seriously Bonaventure grads take this, is that a basketball game, it may actually lead to bloodshed on Saturday.
Divorce, one of the two. It's funny too, because, Schmidt is famous for calling the Bonaventure fan base a cult. And he says that with a lot of love and affection. And I know the connotation of cult isn't always, cuddly and fun loving, but it really is kind of an appropriate, moniker. And believe me when I tell you that my wife backs it up, because she's seen it firsthand, watching me watch games. And I'll say here, which is funny, because we've been married almost 26 years, or, we will get married. We will make it 26 if we make it past Saturday. And she's not a sports fan, even remotely. She has zero interest in sports, even LSU sports. I'm, during football season, I'm the guy who's glued to the TV set watching my alma mater-in-law, as I call it, LSU, play football. Especially last year when they had that great year with Joe Burrow. So she doesn't really even care, but she kind of feels like she owes it to her friends who do care and who want they all want her to join the trash talk with me. So it's kind of funny. She actually did say the other day in an unguarded moment, though, she's like, I kind of want the Bonnies to win, because I know it'll make you very happy, even though I know it'll make you incredibly insufferable.
Well, she gets to deal with this big platform stuff all the time. Like you said, LSU football, even the baseball program. I mean, this is she doesn't need this. You need this.
Yeah, basketball it's funny. The last time LSU went to the Final Four, when Big Baby was their player, and they beat Duke and to go to the Final Four. I just remember, and I covered that game. It was in Atlanta, and I remember just feeling rage. I'm like, you know what? It's not just that she doesn't care, but none of her friends who are big LSU fans care either. They'd rather the football team beat Auburn next year than ever go to the Final Four. And of course, they were able to experience that. But that's just the way it is. I mean, what's hilarious, and I say this jokingly, but it's actually true. I'm sure that her English survey classes freshman year were probably bigger than the freshman and sophomore classes of 88 and 89. So I mean, at Bonaventure. So it's we definitely had two different college experiences, that's for sure.
I guess, before I bring in Joan and Matthew, and of course they can always jump right on over me anyway. They know that. I guess just your general thoughts on the Bonaventure season that they've had, dealing with COVID, dealing with a couple players leaving during the season. And of course, everybody says, well, all the schools are dealing with COVID, but in a conference like the Atlantic 10, where Bonaventure is that outpost, and I don't know if that adds to how difficult it was for them to navigate COVID as opposed to Providence or, Rhode Island or any other school in a different conference or whatever. But I don't know. It seems to be that the odds were stacked maybe a little bit more against Bonaventure in accomplishing what they did.
Yeah, because for one thing, they only had a 2-game non-conference schedule, and once you start getting into the nitty-gritty with bracketology and all this, all people want to talk about, they don't really care who you beat in your conference. They want to know who you scheduled in November and December, and there was no November for Bonaventure, and there was only a 2-game December. So that certainly made it challenging. Although I'll say this, I do think in some ways this team was uniquely qualified to actually handle this kind of crazy season, because you got 5 juniors, 3 of whom have been together and have started since day one. You know, Shunier and Lofton and Dom Welch. And you have, you know, in general, in Attaway, you have a guy who is just a winning player, and he put in a year on the bench. You know, hardly anybody sits out a transfer year anymore, and he did, and he became a big part of the program last year. So he's an older type player, and you know, Jared Holmes was also a guy who added to the mix last year. These guys are veterans. They're older players who I think were able to deal with the craziness a lot better than maybe some younger teams might have. I mean, there are no freshman contributors on this team. There's basically 6 juniors and 1 sophomore who play. And so I think that makes them uniquely qualified. What's funny is that, you know, look, I mean, for those of us who care about this team, I mean, you know, and we've all, you know, done what we can to kind of make it through the pandemic, you know, any way that we can. But, you know, these Bonaventure games for a lot of us were kind of like oxygen, you know, just these islands of normalcy. And of course, the irony is that in a normal year where you're going to the first round of the NCAA playoffs, I mean, you're usually talking about a team that's already played 32, 33 games. These teams only played 20. So every game has kind of been a real gift. And I think we all would have felt that way if they'd gone 5-15, but they didn't go 5-15. I mean, they're 16-4. They were Atlantic's 10 regular season champions, Atlantic 10 tournament champions. For those of us who have been around for 35 years and those others who have been around longer, in terms of our involvement with St. Bonaventure, I mean, you know, I don't think we ever, there have been definite moments in our time and we never ever thought we would see a season remotely like this. And now we've got this one to put on top of the one 3 years ago, to put on top of the Andrew Nicholson one from 2012. And all of a sudden we're talking about, you know, one of the more successful programs in the Atlantic 10. And that's just not something I ever would have thought I would be describing St. Bonaventure as back when I was either a student, when I was covering it for the paper in Olean, or even during some of the dark times that followed.
Mike, how would you compare this team this season, this moment, to some of the other championship NCAA tournament teams that Bona has had? You know, I think 5 times in the last 50 years since that national finalist team in 1970.
You know, Jonah, I would liken it. I would say it's a better version of the 2000 team, which I think sometimes gets lost, even though that was the first NCAA tournament team, you know, since ’78, and it was a team that I don't think a lot of us ever thought we were going to see back at the NCAA tournament. And Jim Barron was the coach that year, and it was very similar because you know, that team had a couple of just terrific guards, and Tim Wynn, and they had the big guy up front, and Caswell Cyrus, and you know, very similarly, that's what this team has. In fact, Oshun wears Cyrus's old number, 21, and you know, but I do think that this is a, you know, it's a 2.0 version of that team. I do think I think Lofton's a better player than Wynn. I think that Oshuni is a better player than Caswell, and I think that, you know, one by one the other players are it's just a better fit. And that team took Kentucky to double overtime, and you know, really had a great chance to win the game in regulation. So to me, that's the team that I'm always going to have a real fondness for, just because they were the team that proved that it really could happen at Bonaventure after a long period of time where the pundits all believed that, you know, maybe the best Bonaventure could hope for was a trip to the NIT every 6 or 7 years. And I think that proved it different. And then, of course, when Schmidt came in, I mean, you know, there was the scandal that came in between, and you really thought that maybe that was the demise of the program. And, you know, he's only taken it to an all kind of different level. Look, I think this team is the best team I've seen. And I know that's interesting because they only really play 5.5 guys, 6 guys really. And, you know, you're not supposed to win in 2021 playing an Ironman unit like that. But the players all fit so well together. They're so unselfish. They get along so well. It's so much fun to watch them. Now, the old timers talk about, you know, look, I mean, the team that gets all the glory when you talk about, you know, the dusty old black and white films is the 1970 team that Tim wrote so eloquently about last December.
Well, it's nice of you to say that, but I will point out that it was an oral history, so I didn't really write any of it.
Well,
it was all everybody else's words. So you can't say it's eloquent. Like, maybe I did a good job compiling.
You did do a good job compiling. You're
yeah,
right.
But I didn't know. No eloquence.
So I guess since I was one of the guys quoted, I'm saying I was really.
You were eloquent.
So, but I mean, you know, it was a great story, and I recommend anybody to go to the Athletic who has even the most remotest interest in St. Bonaventure and read that. It's a pack of lunch. It's a little long, but it's worth every minute. But But beyond that team, the team that really captures a lot of imagination still was the 2 years before that, when Lanier was a sophomore, Billy Calbo was a sophomore, Billy Butler was on the team. They had 5 guys who basically played 98% of the minutes, very similar to this year's team. And that team was called the Ironman 5, and they went undefeated during the regular season. And those people in their 60s and 70s and 80s who remember both teams say it's almost uncanny how this team reminds them of that team, not only because of the short rotation, but because of just how well they get along together. That's really the reason why I enjoy this team so well. It's not just how well they play basketball, but how much they seem to enjoy playing basketball together.
You mentioned packing a lunch. You wrote a 2,500 word Facebook post. This wasn't even for the New York Post, right?
No, it was not. Well, I mean, the Post would fire me if I submitted a 2,500 word about my devotion to St. Bonaventure basketball. So I know enough not to do that. Yes.
But you did. I mean, where does that come from? I mean, one of the last things I want to do in my free time is write. I write for a living. I generally do not like it. I don't enjoy writing. It's the worst part of the job. I love the research. I love interviewing. But you actually felt so compelled to sit down in your free time and write 2,500 words on St. Bonaventure. Where does that come from within you?
Well, it's funny, Tim. 3 years ago, during the 2018 season, I broke my leg. So I literally broke it like 2 days after the season opener. That part of it is a coincidence. But a guy that I used to know who was a student manager years ago at Bonaventure, actually it was Mark Schmidt's first student manager, Ian Nolan. He used to put together something called the Bonaventure blog, and he asked me, like in the summertime, what I want to occasionally write about this team, and it's hilarious because my first reaction was, hell no. I mean, the last thing I want to do in my downtime is write but I enjoy this team too much. And part of the reason why I do enjoy my fandom of this team is really the only fan interest that I have. And so I don't feel compelled to be objective. I don't feel compelled to not be an idiot as I'm prancing around my house, rooting and cursing and terrifying my dogs, during these games. And I'm like, so the last thing I wanted to do is write. But then I broke my leg and I was just sitting in a wheelchair for basically 6 weeks. And I was still able to do my job at the Post, but not the same way, obviously, when you can't get to the ballpark. So, and all of a sudden I'm like, you know what, maybe I will. And, during that season, periodically while I was recuperating, and obviously that was a great season. They went to the NCAAs, they beat UCLA. And so like every couple of weeks I would submit something. And, it's hilarious because I'm used to writing in these 725 word bursts, which is what the daily column length is. And all of a sudden I would sit down and I would just write, to write and to just say what I was feeling. I do have a lot of institutional knowledge about the program. So, a lot of that could come out. And suddenly I was realizing that the stuff I was sending him was like 2,500, 3,000 words, but it was all like, it was different from what I wrote because it was all just stuff that, it's kind of like, I've always thought it was interesting that, I find like a Bruce Springsteen blog to be fascinating because if somebody's putting together a Bruce Springsteen blog, he's not getting paid for it. He's just writing these massive screeds because he loves Bruce Springsteen so much. And frankly,
which sports writer is this?
Exactly.
Because I'm of a belief that every Bruce Springsteen fan is actually a professional sports writer.
Yeah, you're not allowed to get your baseball writer's card unless you're able to give the track list from his first 5 albums. But it's true. But and so that's kind of that's kind of the genesis of this. So I did that year. Not after every game. I think I did 7 or 8 or 9, whatever. And I loved it. And the funny thing was, of course, we're all, it is an ego business. No one ever forgets to put their byline on a story, Tim, right? So, the feedback I got was extraordinary from other people who just, I felt the same way. And, I do the same things during the game and, whatever. It was a very nice thing. And it was funny. It's not like I felt compelled to do that ever again until Sunday. And I'm watching that game on Sunday. And it was a weird game because, I think we all believed that they were getting in the tournament more than the other. So it was really kind of just a matter of taking care of some business to win the tournament that they did. And yet I'm sitting there, I'm like, man, I'd really like to write about this, but the bottom blog doesn't exist anymore. And so it was literally 1 o'clock in the morning and I couldn't go to sleep because all I was doing was replaying the game in my head. So I said, what the heck? And I sat down, I started, and the next thing I knew, I had 2,500 words. Had no place to send it, so I put it on my Facebook page. I don't have a blog under my own name. And of course, the funny part is the next morning I got my old friend Ian called me and said, I'm going to figure out a way to put this online so somebody can access it. I'm like, you do that. I can barely turn my computer on. And then the nice folks at say Bonaventure, Tom Missile, buddy of mine, who's one of the big wigs at Bonaventure, put it on the university website, so it's there now too. But yeah, I started life as a Facebook post. I think it's perfect because I just figured I'd start until I stopped. And I didn't stop until I was 2,500 words in. And I know that makes me a lunatic and a little pathological and plenty pathetic also. But what are you going to do? There are worse vices than that. Is the way I explain it to my wife.
Yes. It gets to, and maybe this is a journalism discussion of fandom. And I was just asked this in a mailbag recently. Somebody asked me if, am I a fan of the Bills? And I, explain, and I occasionally have to give the explanation about you can't be a fan. And I think at some point you don't even have to think about it. Like maybe early on in the profession, you had to force yourself not to be a fan, but once you're around it, you get cynical. You've been burned a few times. We were just talking about it before we hit the record button. Things in the business can ruin your night, ruin your morning.
Sure.
And I don't mean as an inconvenience, but from a personal standpoint. Yeah. But my son, thankfully, I guess for me, is into baseball and basketball, two sports I don't cover. And right behind me, my Indians hat. Like it's about the only bit of, I grew up as an Indians fan and Browns and Cavs also. But I've covered the NFL and I'm not a Browns fan anymore. And anyways, it's good to have that draw to kind of keep you kind of plugged in to how a fan feels, because that's our audience.
It is. And, it's interesting. I mean, you referenced that thing that I wrote for the Facebook post on Sunday morning. I actually wrote for my Sunday column for the Post. I will occasionally, mention the fact to my readers that, where I went to college. That's kind of become kind of a regular gag now. But I brought it up because for exactly the things you said, is that I find it valuable to be so invested. Like I grew up, what's different for me, especially similar for you, but it's even more relevant, I think, in my situation. I grew up on Long Island, so I grew up a Mets fan. I grew up although I also rooted for the Yankees, I grew up a Jets fan. They also rooted for the Giants. I mean, that was the rule of my family, was that you rooted for New York. You didn't necessarily, care whether it was the Mets or the Yankees, just you wanted them to do well. But I rooted for all these teams growing up. But I've been doing this now in New York for 30 years. I mean, the first thing, for one thing, when you get in the business, you learn about, you just don't have any real affections for the possibility of covering teams you used to root for. But then you actually work in the market where you grew up, like I do. I mean, and it's funny. I mean, because I have mentioned in my column before my rooting interest were as a kid, people just assume I'm a Mets fan now. And I have to just disabuse them every time and say, I swear to you, I have not lost 1 ounce of sleep over the Mets or the Knicks or the Islanders since 1988. I mean, it's a long time. I mean, what I root for is good stories. Now, a lot of times it would follow. A lot of times we're good teams, so therefore, are you rooting for successes from local teams? Well, one, it's good for business, and two, it's good for my business because good stories. But look, I mean, you can also get great stories. I mean, the Sabres are a wonderful example, I suppose. I mean, you can certainly talk endlessly about that train wreck.
You do work for the New York Post. I mean, negative stories. Your employer does not shy away.
We are not afraid to engage in the negative. So, and look, and I get that, and so I think it's important to remember what it's like to care so much about a team that, like when I was a kid, if the Mets lost a game on Tuesday, I didn't read the paper on Wednesday. And I remember that all these years later when I'm at a game and the Giants have lost a game, and I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to get a Giants fan to read about this again when the last thing in the world they want to do tomorrow is read about it? And I find that to be one of the challenges of the job, and it's an exciting challenge of the job. But I mean, I think you lose that if you lose at least an engagement of sorts with fandom, and the bodies allow me that. I mean, there is no reason for me to limit myself. The only thing I will do a lot of times, if I'm going to a public venue, I will opt to stay on press row, like at a Bonaventure game, only because I'm such a lunatic, and my wife can attest that in the house. I don't want to behave that way publicly. It's not pleasant to observe, and I'm so tied to my professional, codices and so forth that I won't act that way on press row. I'll act like a eunuch on press row, even though it's killing me. And so as a result, when Andrew Nicholson's team made that great run in Atlantic City in 2012, I mean, I barely batted an eye, and I never smiled once through it all until I was driving home. And of course, then it was wonderful. 2 years ago, when the Bonnies lost a heartbreaker to St. Louis in the A10 finals, same thing. I had friends who were begging me to come over and spend the last like 10 minutes of the game. Come on, man, have some fun. I'm like, you have no idea. I just can't. And I didn't. I mean, now that's ridiculous. I should have fun, right? I wasn't working in those games, but I just know that I just don't. I don't like the way that in retrospect, I'm not really proud of the way I behave as a fan while watching these games. But I am, because I mean, to me, I understand then, I can cover a Jets game from 30,000 feet, wholly detached. But I understand that there's a bunch of people who are not watching it that way. They're completely emotionally invested. And I can remember that because I actually do have a fan interest in my life.
Mike, what do you think of the Bonnies' chances here? Because I don't know, you've covered these tournaments before, and this one will be different. This one will not be like anyone that we've seen. And usually you look at the 9 and the 8 seed and you think that's a tough spot to be. I'm a Mizzou grad. They got a 9 draw, and I was kind of, bummed about it, because that even if they win the first one, they're up against the number 1 seed. But do you feel like maybe there's a little more variability with that, given the nature of this college basketball season?
I do, because you just never know how a team's going to react to playing essentially in an empty gym. I know there's going to be people there, but it's not going to be the same. Now, I say that, and it's funny, oddly enough, Bonaventure being as small as it is, it travels extraordinarily well. And so I was at the Kentucky game, and look, nobody travels better than Kentucky. And at that Kentucky Bonaventure game, now whether they were outnumbered or not, the Bonaventure fans were certainly a lot louder. So you can only imagine if this game were being played, pick a tournament site. If this game were being played in Cleveland, and it was LSU, Bonaventure in Cleveland, I mean, that place would be so pro Bonaventure. And look, I mean, obviously the team gets a rise from that. So on one level, I would argue that it's almost, it's a strike against the Bonnies, because it's going to be in an empty gym. That said, I think what you're hoping for are 2 things if you're the Bonnies. One, you want to be able to control the pace, and they're incredible at controlling the pace. I mean, high-scoring teams in the Atlantic 10 didn't score against them. So if that can transfer to LSU, who's a better version of the St. Louis's and VCU's and Davidson's they should face during the regular season, keep the game in the 60s, they got a shot. But to me, the other thing is that they're so thin. I mean, if somebody sprains an ankle in the first minute of the game, if somebody whistles Kenny Lofton for 2 quick fouls, and all of a sudden things are different. It's harder for a team like that really to recover. So if they can stay healthy and if they can control the pace, they're going to be in it at the end. That's not going to say they're going to win, and it's not even say they're going to win by a deuce to the buzzer. But that's going to be a game people are going to want to watch the last 10 minutes of the second half, I believe, assuming those 2 things are in order.
Where do you think Bonaventure should be seated? I know that you come with this with some bias, but you did mention that you didn't think they were fairly seated.
No, I know. I to be honest with you, I said that, but I meant a lot of people didn't think it. I actually think 9 seed is exactly probably where they deserve. I mean, they did not have an out of conference schedule, so and they didn't go undefeated in the league. They lost 4 games in the league. I mean, they had a very, very good season. To me, they are 8 or 9, whatever. Pick 2, there's no difference between the 2. To me, 9 is a perfect seeding. It's an unfortunate seeding. I mean, in some ways, it was hilarious to hear people who live and die with a team like I do, who were almost wondering if it'd be better to root to lose the championship game, so you get a 10 seed because you have a better shot than against maybe a Maddenville 7, then you get a 2 instead of a 1. I look at the fact that it's the highest seed in Bonaventure history by a lot, and to me, that's exactly where they belong. I heard my good friend Pete Thamel from Yahoo Sports was raging about how unfairly seeded they were, and I just disagree. Unfairly seeded would be, if Gonzaga was the one opposite for one thing out of the 8-9 game. It's not. You clearly have the most manageable number 1 in the bracket. They probably really shouldn't be a number 1 now because of their injury. But so if you do wind up in the second round, whoever's going to be, Bonaventure or LSU, you got to like their chances of at least having a puncher's chance of taking out number 1 in that round. So to me, I mean, I had zero problem with the seeding. To me, I mean, in fact, once they won the game and everybody asked me, what do you think that's going to mean? There was one bracket that I saw, they were as high as a 6. I'm like, that's just not going to happen. I mean, It's not going to happen, because of, it's just not going to happen, but I don't think they deserve to be that high, frankly. I mean, I think 8-9 is exactly where they deserve to be.
It's pretty bold of you, Mike. Not just happy to be there. You're looking at which number 1 seed you're going to knock off.
Hey, you know what? Here's the thing. I was just happy to be there in 2000, and and they almost beat Kentucky, and I'm like, you know what? Why not? And then you see teams like Loyola, you see other teams of similar ilks to Bonaventure make a run, the VCUs, the George Masons. You're like, you get a bounce here, a bounce there. Why not? You're in the. I mean, there are teams you don't ever want to go up against. You don't want to go up against that, UNLV team, even though they lost, in that year. That would be a no contest. You don't want to go up against Lou Alcindor every year. But I mean, look, if you have a team you think is good, and I think that most Bonaventure fans, even through their rose-colored glasses, I mean, I think it's fair to say this team is really good. They've beaten good teams. They haven't panicked. I mean, they're going to give you representative effort. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to win the game. But I mean, if you believe that you have a representative team, then why not feel that, if you play well and you get a team on the right day, you're going to win. So, and, yes, look, I mean, I do think right now the game that I feel less confident about is the LSU game. I think LSU is in a better place right now than Michigan is because, Michigan's is hurting right now. But whatever. I mean, we'll see how that plays out. You'll keep this on tape and certainly play it back to me if it turns out 101 to 40. I covered a few of those games 101 to 40. I still remember sitting courtside in Morgantown, West Virginia, Tom Chapman throwing his jacket, getting kicked out of a game. The Bonnies lost 125 to 64. So that's always what I tell people. If you want to question my credibility, knowing what the hard times are like at St. Bonaventure, trust me, I saw that.
You mentioned being in Cleveland for that 2000 tournament and being at Big Bonnie's games over the years, and how well that fan base travels and how many people might be at this game if they were allowed to be in a normal season. What do you think it's been like for the Bona faithful not being able to go to the Riley Center this year and not being able to gather and enjoy this season in the way that they could in any other year?
Well, look, I feel worse for the students because, you essentially get 4 years to enjoy that aspect of campus life, which is very enjoyable. I mean, even when they're terrible, going to the games is a fun experience, a fun way to spend, 2 hours, someplace other than the Burton or wherever. I feel worse for them, and I feel terrible for the faithful, locals who have supported that team, with their wallets for decades. But the weird thing is, I mean, so much of what the Bonaventure experience is are alumni who refuse to go away, like myself. Like we're all kind of like honorary members of that, like 24-year-old guy who's supposed to have graduated 4 years ago, but still shows up on campus a lot. In a lot of ways, that's us. And we would probably. I mean, I wouldn't have gone to any games this year. I mean, I would have watched as many as I could, on streaming or whatnot. I wouldn't have gone. I mean, I probably wouldn't have made a trip to the Riley Center this year. Maybe I would have gone to the Fordham game because it's close for me. Maybe now I would have made professional arrangements to cover the first round, another game in the first round wherever Bonaventure was at. But most of us, the overall majority of Bonaventure fans don't go to games anymore because we're doing other things. We're other places in the country. So it's not exactly an easy commute to the Riley Center. So I think a lot of us are enjoying it. It's like I said earlier. I mean, it really is kind of a shot of normalcy. Yes, it's weird to see the Riley Center with nothing but cardboard cutouts, and it's really surreal because I know where I'm sitting in my cardboard cutout, so I see myself, with my beer and my NIT shirt about 7 times a game. So that's kind of a little strange. But from that standpoint. Now, look, a lot of us would have made a pilgrimage to the NCAA tournament. So, yes, we feel a little bit, I guess some people feel a little deprived of that. But, look, I think once you're watching the game, one of the things about sports in general, I find, is that if you're at the game and you're covering the game so you see how empty it is, I think it makes more of an impact on you than if you're watching it on TV. To me, especially like the NFL, after a while, you're watching on TV, you forget there's actually people in the stands. And, I think that's part of the experience also is that, most of us would have been watching this and following this on TV anyway.
Do you have a favorite player?
Bonaventure?
Oh, go ahead, Matthew.
I'm sorry.
How'd you end up at Bonaventure?
Great question. I was actually signed, sealed, and delivered to go to Dayton, believe it or not. I went to a high school. The religious order at the high school was the same at Dayton, so I was, and they knew what I kind of wanted to do, and they had a communications program there, and so I really didn't. It's funny, I didn't give a lot of thought to it, but my senior year, I went to the Lapchick tournament, which St. John's used to host every year, and it was the year St. John's went to the Final Four, and they almost lost to St. Bonaventure in the first round. So, and I knew about St. Bonaventure only because of Bob Lanier, the way most people who don't live in Buffalo or Rochester know about Bonaventure. And I just remember going and talking about it with my guidance counselor, like, they have a really pretty good journalism program too. You might want to take a look at that. And of course, the funny thing is I'd already sent my deposit into Dayton, and on a lark on Easter vacation that year, my father and I took a drive to Bonaventure. And we happened to get there literally on, one of the 17 picture postcard days you get in Olean every year, where it's 71, sunny, and that campus just looks like you've literally, arrived at heaven's doorstep. And I was like, oh my God. And, I was hooked, and it was really just by weird, dumb luck that I wound up there. And, I've really, in some ways, just never kind of left.
I got to say, I was maybe not signed, sealed, and delivered, but I was accepted and planning on going to Bona in 2000. And then I visited in February and then quickly changed my mind, and I ended up going to a different school.
Yeah, the exact opposite experience. And of course, the funny thing is the flip side to my experience is, 5-6 years out of school, I covered a game at Chapel Hill in like February. And I'm walking around like, what's wrong with you? You could have come someplace like this, and you chose to go someplace like that. I mean, it is a wonderful place. It is not a perfect place. And the weather is one of the things that you start with.
Do you have a favorite player on this team that you really enjoy watching?
I can't get enough Attaway. I can watch Attaway all day. He's tough. He's smart. His basketball IQ is off the charts. You can just tell. I mean, you don't like the profile of player, but you can tell he's an Indiana player. Smart, knows, incredibly unselfish. Plays like, he could have easily played on Hickory High, or could play in any, those great Indiana type teams that you've seen through the years. He's just so smart, so tough. I mean, he almost had his nose broken in two against St. Louis. Sat out, came back with his stuffing in his nose, and he played great. And he just, he hadn't hit more than 2 threes all year. And then against Davidson, the game's in the line, he gets the ball in the corner, and he makes the three. I just love everything about his game. I mean, he's a winner to me. And it's funny because, really, of the 5 starters, he's probably the guy that you think of fifth, if maybe fourth. Maybe it's him or Dom as the number 4 or 5 guy, because you always think of Oshun, and you always think of Lofton, as well you should. And look, Holmes has been a top scorer for them for 2 years. It takes you a while before you start thinking about Attaway, but I just love watching that guy play. And I actually met him last year. Bonaventure had a 100th anniversary celebration of the program, 50th anniversary of the Final Four. And there was a small dinner the night before that I was fortunate enough to be invited to with the 1970 Final Four team and last year's Bonaventure team. And it was, you can really tell, and not all the same players are still here, but Attaway was a guy that I knew nothing about because he was sitting out. And he was a guy who introduced himself to every player. You had to see the look on Greg Gary's face and Matt Gant's face that he knew who they were. He had taken I'm sure he didn't grow up a fan of the 1970 Bonaventure team. He had taken the time to see who they were, what they had done. Part of that is a credit to Mark Schmidt, who makes sure these kids are aware that they're not beginning a link. They're kind of extending a link. So that's part of it. But I really was impressed by Attaway, who knew all those players by name, who was accessible, and he just really impressed me that day. And I had no idea what kind of a player he was, and now I know what kind of a player he is. So I put those 2 things together. He's among the favorite guys I've ever watched. He's played 20 games for the team. I get it. I have a soft spot for a lot of ex-bodies, guys who were friends of mine in school and guys who I've gotten to know a little bit. Elmer Anderson, I love. I was in school with Elmer, and he's one of the great guys you'll ever meet. Darren Quinlan's the same way, a guy I went to school with. I could go on and on with my favorite, Bonaventure people, Billy Calvo. I could go endless. But of a guy that just from strictly watching him play, I love watching Attaway play.
I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, and also Jonah, because he covered them, saw him quite a bit in Cheektowaga High School. Dominic Welch, was this expected I mean, to be this type of player in the Atlantic 10, because coming out, I just recall, yeah, he broke the records, obviously, and he was very highly accoladed, if I can even turn that into a verb. But there was kind of like maybe people weren't so sure. And then he's just turned into a very good college basketball player.
Well, I know Schmidt always talks about him and how impressed he is with how he had no idea how high his basketball IQ was, and how quickly he's adapted to. Look, obviously, when you give him space, he's going to shoot a three and he's going to make a lot of them. But he's not just a one-trick pony. I mean, he's a guy who plays. You know, he's a lockdown defender, which I don't think anybody saw coming, including Schmidt. He's a great rebounder. I mean, you know, he's a terrific rebounder. He's unselfish, and he's a force. I mean, you know, sometimes you have to harness that. I mean, he came very close to getting in some trouble in both the Duquesne game and the VCU game, because I mean, you know, he can get, you know, he wants to defend his teammates, and you know, and he's not going to take any crap from anybody. So sometimes you got to reel that back in. But I know Schmidt says that he's a guy, one of the most surprising players he's ever coached, because he just, you know, he knew he was getting a very good shooter and a very good scorer, but he didn't know the other aspects of the game he was getting, and he's been, you know, really happily surprised by all of that.
Did I read that right, Jonah? I mean, my take on him coming out of high school was that?
Well, yes and no. And I think Mike analyzed it very well. There were questions about Dom Welch, not necessarily how good he was at shooting and scoring. I mean, he set the all-time scoring record, and he was triple, quadruple teamed on a lot of those nights in high school. But he did have to go to a prep year, and there were questions about his defense and the other parts of his game. And I think when he signed at Bonaventure, some of the high school coaches that I had talked to wondered if that was the right fit, if he was the right type of player to play in Mark Schmidt's scheme. It is very focused on defense and doesn't really let one player take all the shots and do some of the things that he did in high school. And the fact that he's integrated so well is a credit to Dom, and also a credit to Mark Schmidt and the rest of the coaches at Bonaventure. But it also reminds me, Mark Schmidt's done very well with junior college players, and a lot of junior college players come in with that type of dynamic where they were the star player that took a lot of shots, and they have to become more of a team player. So I think that has maybe helped Schmidt and his coaches figure out how to get the best out of a player like Dom Welch.
Well, I think one of the things that really impressed Schmidt too is that, you know, early in his freshman year, he went down with a leg injury of some sort, and he missed 6 weeks, I think. And you know, a lot of times, you know, he comes and played right away, but then he didn't, you know, he was sidelined. A lot of times, especially as a freshman, you can come in and kind of really be discouraged, and you're not. But he came back a different player. I mean, he spent his time away, as opposed to brooding and feeling sorry for himself. He had watched, you know, other guys in the team and how they approached things, you know, including Lofton, his classmate, but also the seniors in that team. And, you know, Schmidt talks about, he came back a completely different player off that injury. It was like a whole different Dominic Welch that he saw. And that really impressed him too, because he took advantage of what could have been a terrible situation. And look, I mean, they fell a tough roll away from actually making the tournament as a freshman. And part of the reason is because the last 10 or 15 games, Dom Welch was every bit as good as Lofton and Oshuni was, and every bit as good as the seniors in that team were.
How are you going to watch the game on Saturday?
Well, it's funny. I actually have to cover the Georgetown game that precedes it. So, and there'll be a little bit of a layover. So that's going to be kind of fun. But I'm going to watch it at my house. I'm going to watch it with my wife. I mean, and you know, my wife will probably, just because, you know, she feels like she's got to play the part, she'll wear LSU gear and root for LSU. But it's not going to be as bad as it could have been if I would have married an actual fan of LSU basketball. But
so, you know, do you have to? Will your editor allow you to pause or delay filing so that you can enjoy the game? Or
well, that's part of the reason why I'm doing the game I'm doing, because I will be, you know, once the outcome happens with Bonaventure, win or lose, I'll take my 10 minutes to celebrate, or my 15 minutes to, you know, to mourn the end of the season. You know, and then I still have about an hour and a half to deadline, so I can figure that part of it out. But one thing I did say to them, and it's funny, I said, you know, I really don't think I should write another Bonaventure column, and they said, no, you really shouldn't. Enough. You're right about that. Good scouting report. You shouldn't write another Bonaventure column for a while. Let them win a game or two, then you can go back to it. I'm like, yeah.
So is the Georgetown column Patrick Ewing win or lose?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's the reason why the column is appealing, is because it's Patrick. I mean, you know, I like to say, you know, it's funny. I mean, the New York Post is a local paper. It's a great local New York City is a pretty fun local, but it's a local paper. So if you have a tie in New York, we're going to play that fiddle for as long as we can. And Patrick hasn't played here in 20 years, but he's still of us, and so that's going to be probably the focus of our college basketball. Even if the mighty Bonnies manage to pull it out, I don't think they're going to make the back page, unfortunately.
If we haven't kept you too long, Mike. Oh, I'm sorry, Jonah. You actually had another basketball.
I have a listener submitted question for you.
Okay.
One of our loyal friends of the show wondering, you had 2,500 words to write about St. Bonaventure, but not a word yet written about Damon men's basketball.
Joe,
I wonder who that listener is.
I wonder who that listener was. Well, you can tell said listener that I was watching the last 10 minutes of the game yesterday, even though the first 90 seconds of that game was a 10-0 run for St. Thomas Aquinas. So I almost ran away because I could almost sense he knew that I was watching. I was thrilled for Mike Vaccaro. He was a guy I went to college with, and man, he's a good coach, and it's just so much fun to watch him have success there. And I did take pictures of him cutting down the net, so I will be forwarding them to him at some point today. Hey, it's not a bad year for Western New York basketball, right? I mean, Damon College, Division II, the Bonnies, Division I. The Bulls came very close, and with UB, and unfortunately, Niagara and Canisius probably didn't have a chance when you had the Patino hurricane in the MAC. But it's a good year for Western New York basketball, and Damon's part of that equation. Love the big kid. Love watching him.
Oh yeah,
he's fun to watch.
If we haven't kept you too long, I know that people are going to tune in. We have a lot of Yankees fans in Western New York who listen to this podcast. I'm sure are curious if Mike Vaccaro is going to talk about the Yankees. So or the Mets, whatever. I mean, what's your preview of New York baseball in 2021?
Well, I think they're both playoff teams. I mean, now whether they both make the playoffs is a whole different question, I guess. But the Yankees are definitely, they're a 94, 96 win team. And to me, they're as good as anybody in the American League. The issue for every team in baseball is, can you compete with the Dodgers? And really, secondarily, can you compete with the Padres if the Padres beat the Dodgers? Because both those teams look like they're going to be juggernauts. Look, I think the Mets are a 92, 93 win team also, unless their ancient dysfunction kind of transfers ownerships. But they have the best pitcher in the game, so that's going to be a nice thing to rely on every 5 days. Their lineup is going to be a lot of fun. Lindor is already making a lot of friends. He's so much fun to watch, and I think he makes them a whole different ball club. We've gotten a little tired, I think, of the Subway Series around here. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't necessarily want to inflict on the rest of the country another Subway Series World Series, because I don't think that a lot of people outside of the tri-state area were terribly fired up about that in 2000. But those 6 Subway Series games are going to play against each other this year, or 4, however many they play this year, are going to have a lot more meaning than they have in a long time, because both teams are very good. Both teams are definitely playoff quality. Both teams could win their divisions, I think. Although, the Rays are still going to be a tough out for the Yankees, and the Braves are a formidable foe for the Mets and other teams in that division. But it's going to be fun, and I really hope for the fans in New York that. Maybe by May you can get 15,000 fans in, and then who knows as things go the rest of the year. But that's really something that was missing last year. I mean, despite everything about that season was weird, but those games with fake noise and cardboard cutouts, that was a little bit odd.
This just popped into my head, so I'll throw one more question at you, and I'm having trouble formulating it, but I guess it's a philosophical question about your job, your career, Mike. We just mentioned Patrick Ewing, and you making reference of the Mets having the best pitcher in baseball for whatever reason made me think of Dwight Gooden. And I guess that led me to another thought about New York sports gods and you covering these people. This is not like me covering Buffalo sports. There are Buffalo sports gods, Dominic Hasek, Jim Kelly.
Sure.
But that's not the same echelon of these icons that you interact with, you've dealt with, you write about. What's that dynamic like to be a chronicler of again, I'm getting redundant and trying to explain where I'm going with this, but there is a mystique about the New York sports icons that you probably didn't, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, Joe Namath, all that stuff. What's that like?
Well, I think the guy who embodies that, exactly what you're trying to say, is Derek Jeter. And so I covered Derek Jeter's first game in Cleveland in 1996, and I covered his last game in Boston, 2013, I think was his last year. And of course, I covered his last at-bat at Yankee Stadium, which was Hollywood, and everything in between, just about everything in between. I spent a year or two out of town, but for the most part, I covered every ounce of Derek Jeter's career. And of course, Jeter, is spoken about now in the same lineage of Ruth and Gehrig and DiMaggio. And I know it makes a lot of people's eyes roll who aren't Yankee fans or aren't New Yorkers. They think he's the product of a lot of New York hype, although I would argue that, you get how many hits did he have? 3,600 hits. That's not hype. That's a lot of hits. And he's got 5 World Series rings, of which he was a vital member of all 5 teams. That's not hype. That's not New York. But the one thing I will say is that, I think it was important, and it was important to me. There was a term that Red Smith used to use about, and I think his sports editor Stanley Woodward had given him this term: don't god up the players. Don't make them more than they are. And look, it was easy to kind of get on the Derek Jeter train sometimes because everything was working well. This guy used to work his way through the Maxim Hot 100 every year. And then he would also go out and hit 320 and win a World Series. Life doesn't get better than that. And he would always seem to do something, the flip play, getting that hit in his last at-bat at Yankee Stadium. Joe Girardi once said, just shook his head and said, the man's a movie. And while that was true, you kind of had to try and not get caught up in that, because it was easy to do that. And if you do, then you're just another, fanboy blogger who doesn't have, a responsibility to kind of try and tell both sides of the story. But the thing of it is, he was so good that a lot of times both sides of the story were the same story. He was great. They won because he was great. But one of the great things about covering a guy like that is that you appreciate that not all athletes are like that. Look, Saquon Barkley is a great player, but he hasn't really accomplished a lot yet. You can write breathless prose when he fires off a 68-yard run when he's healthy, but he's not the Derek Jeter of football right now. So I think it's great to be able to have him as a reference point, because it allows you to be able to maybe be a little bit more perspective laden when you're writing about other athletes. I didn't cover Joe Namath and I didn't cover Joe DiMaggio, obviously, but I do think that I got a sense of what it was like to be around those guys when they were playing, by being around Jeter so much, even more so than A-Rod. A-Rod was obviously his own media circus, but for a lot of different reasons. Jeter's was the old school. He's great. He's always great. He's been great for years. How do you write about him being great a different way today than you did last Wednesday?
It's the exact opposite of covering the Buffalo Sabres.
I've covered a lot of lousy teams in my day, but nothing quite like that. Wow.
At least there was some news today. It broke through the malaise of all those losses. There was something different to write about if you cover the Sabres. Mike, anything you want to add that we didn't ask you about?
Oh man, this has been fun. I've enjoyed it. I could talk about the Bonnies for at least 2,500 words and probably 2,500 hours if you let me, but you probably run out of tape and you might even run out of questions by then. But that has been fun. I appreciate it, Tim. It's great talking to you. And
not so many words, though, that we carve out a little extra space for Mike McDonald.
What's that?
Not so many words, though, that we couldn't carve out a little space for Mike McDonald.
There's always got to be a place for royalty in this town, right? So there we go.
Yeah, he is Western New York's Patrick Ewing. Western New York's Joe DiMaggio.
It's the first family of Buffalo basketball. One son plays for Niagara, one son played for Penn and now works for the Nets. His brother-in-law was a great player for Navy. I covered his brother-in-law when he was just crushing Army every year as a great player at Navy, Mike Hury. So it's definitely the first family of Buffalo.
And one son working for the Brooklyn Nets.
That's right, exactly. So, and
maybe you can get a column out of that.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm sure I will at some point. And I actually, it's hilarious. I'll leave you with this. When he was playing at Fairleigh Dickinson, as a freshman, he had a game-winning 3 to beat Rutgers, and it's hilarious. So I'm like, that's actually kind of a fun story. I could do something with that. And I called him Mac, who I've known 30 years, and he was like, no commenting me. I'm like, what? If I can't get you to talk, I should really retire and do something else. Finally, I tried to explain to him what he was doing. I don't want to be on mail. It's not going to be on you, egomaniac. I'm writing about the kid, but you watching it, So Yeah, so he's the best though. The McDonald family is just you'll find nobody finer than anybody in that family.
Mike's son might want to keep his distance, because if you ever start breaking stories on the nets or getting some inside, info,
Right.
the finger's going to be pointed squarely.
He's got to stay from me and Woj both because the link is too obvious, right?
Yeah, that's right. Mike, thanks for this. Hopefully we didn't keep it too long here, but I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Me too, Tim. Guys, I appreciate it. Go
All right, thanks so much.
All right, thanks, guys.
Tim Graham and Friends is brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and business consultants. CTBK is a leading accounting firm with a growing team of accountants and business consultants with roots in Amherst, New York. CTBK pairs every project with a focus on a human connection between its team and the client. For assurance, accounting, taxes, litigation support, and advice on mergers and acquisitions, CTBK is available and ready to solve any issue your business faces. For a consultation or to request a quote, call 716-630-2400. Again, that's 716-630-2400. CTBK, over a quarter century of proven accounting and business excellence for Western New York and beyond.